Welcome everyone to this session for SeNSS, Ask SeNSS. It's a second webinar we have been doing. I hope you can hear me and see me well. I will be talking about SeNSS today with you and preparing for PhD studies. I'm going to cover quite a lot of material, but feel free to post your questions in the chat. And you might sometimes see me looking the other way. It's because I've got the chat box open there, and I will be looking through the chat to make sure that we pick up all the questions that you've got and we answer them. I will be also recording the session, and we will be posting the recording online on our website. So if you want to revisit that question, any questions, or if you want to revisit my slides, or if you want to revisit sections of the recording, especially when I will be talking about the criteria we're using for evaluating the applications, feel free to do so. So the outline for today is why do a PhD? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. And what I want to do there is I want to give you some guidance in terms of the motivation. The motivation is a particularly important question when it comes to doing a PhD and convincing supervisors to work with you. I will then talk a bit about SeNSS and who we are, what we offer. And then the two important bits where I would like to offer a bit more support is around finding a supervisor, identifying a supervisor, and some hints and tips in terms of approaching that supervisor from my experience as a supervisor who receives applications, and then writing a proposal. I will tell you how we evaluate those proposals, and I will tell you what are the strategies you need to follow in order to be able to kind of get a proposal, a strong proposal in, and I will kind of reverse engineer the evaluation criteria so you can understand where we're coming from. So first of all, the motivation. And the motivation is crucial because that's the first question that usually a supervisor is asking. Why do a PhD? And traditionally, PhDs were qualifications that were leading to academic careers. So students who obtained PhDs, they usually wanted to become professors, they usually wanted to work for the academia. The best doctoral students become professors, and the career paths are quite linear. You go from PhD to lecturer or assistant professor to associate and then to full professor. One of the main challenges, though, is that if you look at the job market, and if you look at what we call the graduate destinations of PhD students, they don't all end up in the academia. They work in other organizations, research-based organizations. They work in organizations that can have a corporate engagement. The variety is there. And what we try to do at SeNSS is to prepare you for a career not simply in the academia, but also for those of you that you wish for a career outside the academia. And that's something that I will come back when I explain a bit more about SeNSS, how we do that, how we prepare you for these careers outside the academia. So let me return back to the motivation aspect. And the advice here is how you could present yourselves to your supervisor or to a potential supervisor. So there are three kind of elements you could reflect on and perhaps think about how you fit into these purposes. The first one is what we call the instrumental purposes. It's the career of the researcher. You know, I want to have a career in a research-based role, in a research-based organization. I want to have an academic career. That's, you know, where do you see yourselves in the next 5, 10, 20 years? You know, what gives you enjoyment? What are those areas that you would like to work within? A lot of that is also going to be reflected in your personal statement. We require you to provide us with a personal statement as part of the application, and that personal statement you need to demonstrate, what are your aspirations for your future career. The second main area of motivation is around people having intellectual purposes, a personal interest, satisfaction, the contribution to the discipline. Is the discussion I always have with colleagues. Imagine someone like myself, which has an established research career. I do research in international business. That's my area of expertise. I am empirical in my work a lot of the time. So I look at data sets, I look at decisions of multinationals. And, I always give this example. It's 11 o'clock in the evening. I've just finished putting together a big data set combining different databases. And it's now into my statistical software, ready for me to do my first command and look at the preliminary evidence. Now, because of my personal interest, because of my satisfaction there, even if it's quite late in the evening, I never stop. I never switch off the computer. I might actually sit there and hit that first button, trying to figure out what the data is telling me. So I've got this passion for my research, and that's also something that you need to demonstrate, especially to your supervisors, that passion, that intellectual purpose, that you want to get satisfaction from what you're doing. And then, of course, there are the third set of kind of goals, which is around altruistic purposes. We're not doing it for us only, but we're doing it for others. We're here as researchers to solve problems. We're here as researchers to enable change, to benefit others. A lot of you might be referring to your applications in sustainable development goals and how your application might be solving problems with real impact. And that's also something that we ask you to demonstrate in the application. What kind of impact will you have? What kind of change you will make? How you're going to benefit others through your PhD. So you could be motivated by one of the three. You could be motivated by all three of them. You could talk about your career as a researcher. You could talk about the personal interest you have, and you could talk about cases where you enable change. Occasionally, I read personal statement of students, and they basically even go back to the early days as a child, where they saw someone in their family, or they basically faced a problem like that, or they're coming from a country that is actually facing an important issue at the moment, and they want to contribute, they want to resolve that issue and help their fellow humans to actually live better. So that's one kind of area. And to complement that, I've got here some data from Vitae. Vitae is an organization that we do a lot of work with, and they have developed this very interesting framework that we're actually using in the development of doctoral students, doctoral researchers. But Vitae has done this very interesting research a few years back, looking at the career destinations. And you can see, obviously, social sciences, which is where we are, is represented by the light purple bars there. You could still see that a significant part of doctoral researchers end up in teaching and lecturing in higher education, but equally, more than 50% of people who get a PhD in social sciences, they actually work for other organizations. They go into other occupations, they go into other research organizations, not higher education, or even they go into some higher education research occupations. So for example, our research manager, our manager at SeNSS, Dr. Felicity Cesnat, she's a doctor, she has got a PhD, and at the same time, she's now working for SeNSS, she's now managing the studentships of SeNSS. Now, who we are, it's really important, and it's really important to tell you who we are, because you're going to be making an application to us. I imagine you might be considering making applications to other doctoral training partnerships as well. There are 14 of them. What do we offer? What makes us unique? So we are what we call a doctoral training partnership, and we are funded by an organization called the Economic and Social Research Council. The ESRC, in short, is one of the 7 research councils who receive funding by the UK Research and Innovation, the UKRI. And at the moment, the ESRC funds 14 doctoral training partnerships. So it's ourselves and another 13. And what we do is we get an award every year, money from the UKRI and the ESRC. And what we do is we give studentships and we also give postdoctoral fellowships. The amount of postdoctoral fellowships we give is relatively small in contrast to the amount of studentships, but still we've got a nice community of postdoctoral fellows, people that have finished with their PhD and they want to keep themselves into the academia, and they want to work with the supervisor and they want to consolidate the work they have done over their PhD. We award approximately 40 studentships every year. The number is not set in stone, and it's not set in stone because what we do is we look at other aspects of the application. So for example, some of you might be doing overseas fieldwork. Some of you might be doing difficult language training. And that amount of money has to come from our main grant, and we need to use that money to support you. So if, for example, I've got an application which is quite expensive from an overseas point of view, so they basically take 6 months overseas, they go into a very underdeveloped area and they need to learn a new language, a difficult language, which means that they need to get additional money. That means that I cannot fund another application which is much lighter. There's always a balance there, and we need to make sure that we support, and we make sure that we support the top applications, and then we support them in full. So we don't expect the students to contribute anything from an economic and financial point of view. You get a good stipend, and the stipend at the moment is just over £17,000 per year. For London universities like Royal Holloway, Goldsmiths, City and Roehampton, you get an additional £2,000 on top of the 17,000 to cover for additional London expenses, and also you get your fees covered. Now, a key question here is that I'm an international student. Will I get my fees covered in full? The answer is yes. At the moment, the partnership is covering international student fees in full. So international students, we don't expect them to pay a penny towards the fees, and then of course get the same stipend as home students. So we give about 40 studentships every year, give or take 1 or 2. Now, what makes us different? There are 2 things that I can say they make us different from other DTPs. One is our training offering, and we've got different levels of training that you can tap to if you become a SeNSS funded student. We've got what we call the basic training, all delivered online through a number of different instruments. One of them is what you read there, access to Sage Campus. We've got a partnership with the publishing house Sage, and we've got access to the Sage Campus, which is a suite of online training that you can tap into, and you could do it at your own time in order to cover the potential gaps that you might have. In terms of our training, you get access to all 10 institutions in the DTP, and training that is being offered across those 10 institutions. And some of the training that these institutions is offering could be quite advanced. So, and all that is basically presented through our virtual learning environment, which is a Moodle page hosted by the University of Essex. The other element that makes us relatively unique is the opportunities we offer you to expose yourselves and your PhD to the outside world. And we do that through 2 channels. One is the network of over 200 organizations we have. And those organizations are offering what we call work placement opportunities. So you could go and work for Sage, for the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology, spend up to 3 months in those organizations and work on a project. And they have developed your communication, engagement, impact skills, but also we have opportunities to support what we call overseas visits. So you could spend up to 3 months, excuse me, in an institution abroad, again, disseminating your research, perhaps getting some training, perhaps developing your networks. Your supervisor might have established relationship with colleagues in that institution, and you could work together on possible publications, so on and so forth. And all that is actually funded. So for placements, for overseas visits, you will get extensions to your studies for up to 3 months, which means that we're going to be giving you the stipend and we're going to be covering your fees. And for both placements and overseas visits, we will also be covering your accommodation, travel expenses, so on and so forth. So these kind of two things make us unique in terms of our offering in contrast to other DTPs. We are a relatively small team that manages SeNSS. The lead institution, the coordinating institution, is the University of Essex. So the director, Professor Ismini Gizelis, the manager, Felicity Sesnat, and the coordinator, Rachel Layton-Jones, are all based at the University of Essex. I'm the only one who's based in another institution. I'm currently based at the University of East Anglia. I'm in my office right now, and I've got responsibility predominantly for your training provision. The people that you will probably need to contact, if you need to contact in the process of application, obviously apart from your supervisory team and your home institution lead, is myself and Rachel, because the two of us, we can answer any questions that the institutions, your home institutions, might not be able to answer, and I'm more responsible for training and compliance, which means that I might be reviewing your applications and making recommendations about your training in the early stages of your PhD. Now, very, very important here, this is a table that shows you SeNSS universities and pathways. Now, why it's important? It's important because in order to apply for a specific pathway, that pathway needs to belong to one of those institutions. So if, for example, you're thinking of doing a PhD in business and management, and you're thinking of applying for SeNSS funding, your application can only come through one of those institutions that have a tick next to business and management. So you can apply through City, you can apply through UEA, through Essex, through Kent, Reading, Royal Holloway, Surrey, or Sussex. You cannot apply through Roehampton, or you cannot apply through Goldsmiths. Equally, if you want to apply for a social anthropology subject, for example, you can only apply through UEA, Goldsmiths, Kent, Roehampton, and Sussex. The other institutions do not offer that pathway. So in your decision through which universities you will apply, this table is quite important. You cannot apply for a particular pathway through a university that doesn't actually belong into that pathway. So be really careful in your applications. Now, a very common question here, again, is that you can apply to multiple universities for a PhD. So someone can apply to City and University of East Anglia for a business and management PhD, but when it comes to your SeNSS application, you can only apply through one of the two or of the three institutions. You cannot do multiple SeNSS applications through a number of different institutions. You can apply for a PhD place at any institution you like, but you can then only apply for a SeNSS funded scholarship through one of the institutions. Occasionally, strong candidates have that option on their hands, so you can then select. Other candidates might not be as lucky, and therefore they might go with the institution that has proposed them in a way. So be really clear in your application as you're applying for a PhD place, through which institution you will then be applying for a SeNSS funded position. 3 steps for making an application for SeNSS. First step is you need to apply for PhD place at what I would call your home institution. And this is where I said you could apply for more than one institutions. What will determine that? It will be determined by, whether you have established a relationship with a potential supervisor, whether you've got more than one institution that you aspire to study. So for example, someone say, look, I always wanted to study at the University of Sussex, or I always wanted to study at the University of Reading. I'll apply to those 2 institutions and see where my application goes. Third step, therefore, apply for a PhD at the home institution. Second step, you need to create a HEI Apply account, and that's through our website in order to create that account. And then third step is develop your proposal with your supervisor and submit your online application. And you will need, as I said, to submit your online application to your home institution first, and then do that for SeNSS. Some important information here. First of all, key question: do I need to have a master's to apply for a PhD? No, you don't. There are 2 routes to apply. One route is that sometimes you have equivalent professional experience, some professional experience plus an undergraduate degree. We will be looking through that professional experience as part of your application. And sorry, my office lights are automatic, so if I don't move, they suddenly switch off. You can see we're caring about the environment and sustainability here. So we will be looking through your professional experience as part of your application, and we will be making a decision as to whether that professional experience is enough to justify straight entry into the PhD. Equally, if you come from an undergraduate degree and you haven't got a master's and you haven't got professional experience, we will be offering you the opportunity to do what we call a 1+3. So we will be funding your master's year. So during your master's year, you will be getting your fees paid, you will be getting your stipend, and then we will be funding the additional 3 years for the PhD. So actually, undergraduate students that come through straight from the undergraduate, they have a good chance of securing a scholarship, in the sense that we've got a number of scholarships, 12 at the moment, that we ring fence specifically for undergraduate students coming straight to do a PhD. We offer all studentships on a full or part-time basis. Now, important bit to clarify there is that you cannot hold a full-time job and do the part-time PhD. Equally, you cannot do a part-time, a part-time job and then do the full-time PhD. So the rule of thumb there is that we wouldn't expect you to exceed the 37.5 hours if you combine the amount of time you're spending on your PhD and the amount of time you're spending on the part-time job. And obviously, if you get a part-time job and a part-time PhD, the funding will be on a pro rata basis. So we will be funding you for the amount of time you're spending on your PhD. We'll not be giving you the full stipend. As I said already, fully funded for everyone, irrespective of whether you're a home or an international student. And the 4 stages is you can check your eligibility. If you're eligible, apply to the chosen university, discuss your application with the supervisor, and then apply for a SeNSS studentship. There is one important date that you need to keep in mind. 12 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time on Friday, the 20th of January, 2023 is the absolutely final deadline for submitting your SeNSS application. And I'm stressing that because I have had cases in the past where PhD students, very good PhD students, missed the deadline because their mind, for example, was fixed. Oh, it's going to be the 31st of January, or it's going to be the end of January, or anything like that. So write that date with bold letters, or make a note of that date with bold letters in your calendar. It's really, really important to meet that deadline. Most of the institutions equally might have earlier deadlines for applying for PhD places. So you also need to keep an eye on those deadlines from your home institutions. If you have finished your MA degree, there is a question there. If I finish your MA degree, yes, the usual time we found there is the 3 years. Of course, it depends on the MA degree, and it depends on whether you might need additional training. So what we do is we look at the MA, we look at whether that MA provided you with adequate training for doing a PhD, and then occasionally we might say, yes, that's an MA that has provided you with adequate training, you go straight to a 3+3. If we feel that there are gaps, we might be offering you what we call a 3.25 or a 3.5 in order to cover those gaps. Yes, you can switch between full-time and part-time studies in the 3 years. That's one of those cases, though, excuse me, where you would need to get permission from us. So you basically come to us and you say, oh, I want to switch from full-time to part-time. These are the reasons why I want to do that. And most of the time, we just simply approve that application, and there is a clear switch. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be doing it frequently, but I'm saying that occasionally SRC has been very picky if a student constantly changes from full-time to part-time. So we usually try to avoid frequent changes, but once or twice over the period of your PhD, because of opportunities might have emerged, this is absolutely fine. So Sally is asking, will it be a disadvantage in the application if I indicate I would like to do +3 and you decide the 3+1 or a 1+3 would be more suitable? No, there is no disadvantage there. What we make sure is that we make sure that everyone is compared with what we would call the peer group. So in reality, in the competitions, we create three different groups, and we look at the same criteria in terms of the evaluation, but obviously the expectations are very different from these 3 groups. So which are these 3 groups? First group is those students that have done a master's, and a master's that has prepared them well for PhD. So this is the +3 group. So obviously you would expect really, really high quality proposals from these candidates. Then there are those students that have done a master's, but either the master's hasn't prepared them for a PhD, so it doesn't have a significant element of research methods, or it might be a master's which comes from a different discipline. So a master's in engineering, for example, that doesn't prepare you for a PhD in social sciences. So we then look at this group where we'd expect, excuse me, some good level of writing in terms of a research project, but not at the level where we would expect the first group, which is a straightforward +3. And then the third group is this group of undergraduate students that are coming straight from their undergraduate studies to do an application for a master's and a PhD at the same time. And that's the third group, and we compare peers within that group because obviously we would expect not the same preparation for a PhD proposal from this particular group. The application, this point gives me a very good way of introducing that the application for a master's and a PhD for the 1+3 students is not a separate one. So you apply technically for a PhD with an integrated master's year in that period. So you don't need to go and do a separate application for a master's at your home institution and then a separate application for a PhD. You apply for the PhD, and in the process of applying for the PhD, you will identify a master's which is eligible for providing you the relevant training to do the PhD. The second group, no. So if you are in that second group which has a master's but hasn't prepared you for appropriately for doing PhD studies, that is still a 1+3 group. So what we will do is we will offer you the opportunity to do a second master's plus the PhD in a fully funded way. Again, if there are areas where we feel that the master's has enough but not the appropriate amount, we might then make you an offer on the basis of a 3.25 or a 3.5. So sometimes we give you additional time in your PhD period, not a full master's year, but we then work with you to identify specific training and you need to be doing in this quarter of a year or half a year in order to develop and build up your skills. And technically this group is closer to the +3 kind of application group, the straightforward one, the straightforward +3 application group. So just to come back to this point, only one application for the student-led competition through SeNSS. The only area where you can submit more than one application, and you could look through our website, we have launched the last couple of weeks what we call collaborative studentship applications. So these are applications for specific projects that have received funding, and they're going out to recruit over the next couple of months. Deadline is end of February for those projects. So in those collaborative studentship applications, you can submit as many applications as you like for as many projects as you like. And so this is the only case where you can have multiple applications for SeNSS competitions. Now, I've already mentioned a few things about the choice of studentship, because this is where a lot of questions emerge usually. You know, what is it? What should I apply for? A +3, a 1+3, or anything like that? We've got two things that you can tap into and support your kind of view. One is the list of approved masters. So these are masters that we have approved, and they provide you with specific training, and training which is going to prepare you well for a PhD. Difficult cases obviously always arise, and for example, you have done a master's at a university outside SeNSS, your master's is from an overseas institution, and obviously the initial discussion can be with your supervisor, but if you need additional advice, you can email the core team, and predominantly you can send an email to me. I've got that responsibility of checking the route through which PhD applicants come through. My email is depdirector@sens-dtp.ac.uk. So I will be sharing the slides of this presentation with you. Once we finish with the presentation, I'll send you an email in the email you use for the registration for this seminar, and then I will also, as I said, we will put the video on the website. Now, the other innovation we've introduced this year is we've introduced this training compliance calculator. This is a survey that you can do yourselves. You can provide honest answers. We don't use it for anything else, so we don't collect the data from that survey. It's simply for you and your supervisor. So we ask you through that survey a number of questions about your prior training, and at the end of that survey, the software is programmed in a way that gives you some indication as to which route you should be following. So obviously, if you've got many gaps, the calculator will tell you you will probably need to be applying for a 1+3. If you've covered a lot of the things the calculator might be telling you, you're actually fine with the +3. You don't need to go down the 1+3. That's something that you could use with your supervisors. And then, of course, as I said, you could come to us and discuss with me. Let me just see whether we've got, yes, of course, Pauline, work experience does count for research methods. We have cases in the past where people with significant work experience, especially in research organizations, they didn't need an additional master's, or they have done a lot of the things in practice, and therefore, we take that into consideration when it comes to your training compliance. Would we need to apply for a master's program as well as a PhD program at the home university if we want to go from undergraduate to a PhD? I've answered this question already. I said there is a single application. That is an application for the PhD that then has an integrated master. So you don't apply separately for the master's and the PhD. Then you apply for the PhD, but specifying in the application that this is a 1+3 application, and you will be undertaking one of the approved masters from that home institution. Right. No, not even at the home university. So you don't need to apply separately within the home institution. You will basically, as you're applying for the student-led, that application will be considered with the master's integrated. So there is no need for you to go through the process of applying separately for a master's. You apply for your home institution for a PhD, and you indicate to them that you're going for a SeNSS-funded studentship that effectively covers the master's and the PhD. Do we have any other questions in terms of the process of applications or anything like that? Anybody who wants to come on, more than happy to pick up questions as we go along from the chat, or if anybody wants to come on mic, equally happy. Otherwise, I'll move on to the two key points around supervisors and the evaluation criteria that we use. Right, we will also have time. Right, there is a question there. I already have a supervisor in a place. Do I apply for +3? Yes, if you've got a master's there, if you've got the relevant training, then you go straight for a PhD. You just need to make sure that the supervisor and the place belong to that particular pathway. So the box in that table that I showed you in the beginning is ticked for this university and this particular pathway. You don't need to apply for the scholarship and the university at the same time. Usually what happens, and this is why I said check with the home institution, is really, really important. Some of the universities, most of the universities, will have an earlier application for a PhD place. So you need to apply to the home institution for a PhD place, and then you can apply for a SeNSS-funded scholarship. So that is really, really important. You can always apply for a SeNSS-funded scholarship, but unless you have applied for your home institution, then you might find yourself in a situation where that institution might not be willing to support your application. So make sure that you check the deadline these institutions have before you apply for the SeNSS scholarship. In all cases, the institutional deadline will be earlier than the SeNSS deadline, which is 20th of January. So two important things. First one is finding a supervisor for those of you that you don't have a supervisor already. And if you haven't got a supervisor already, that is going to be a very, very important step to do between now and Christmas. Bear in mind that a lot of the institutions in the UK, especially for those of you that you're coming from international destinations, a lot of the institutions in the UK close over Christmas. and supervisors might not be responding to emails. So make sure that you've got probably a month between now and when university is formally closed for Christmas in order to secure a supervisor and their support. There are two routes there. You don't know the institution, but you know the topic. You have a rough idea about the topic. What I would do there is I would predominantly go through Google Scholar in order to identify individuals who work in these institutions and they can potentially have research expertise in the area I would like to do my research on. It's not the most straightforward way, but that's the one suggestion someone can make in terms of finding a supervisor. Now, some of you might have aspirations about the institution. You might already know your topic and the potential institution. A lot of those institutions that belong to SeNSS, they've got what I would call directories for supervisors. I've got two examples there. Sussex and Kent have these specific directories where you can click, put your keywords for your research topic, and then those institutions will give you a list of potential supervisors that might be willing to supervise, and then you can contact them directly. Now, I've got a question about supervisor change. Ruhma says, my supervisor is teaching at one university at the moment, but will be starting a job at another university in April. Should I apply to the university where she is currently positioned, and how will I be able to transfer with her to the other university in April? I think that's a discussion you need to have with your supervisor, with them. Technically, you need to apply to the university she is currently working at, because that's how we will make sure that she gives you the supervisor supporting statement. It might be the case, though, that you make very clear in your application that you will transfer. And it has happened in the past that students transfer from one institution to another. So it's not a difficult process. As long as the supervisor wants to take the scholarship with them, we can arrange through SeNSS for that scholarship and the student to follow the supervisor. As long as, again, the supervisor moves within SeNSS. So she needs to be moving from one SeNSS institution to another SeNSS institution. If she's moving to an institution outside SeNSS, that's a much more difficult situation, because technically there you're applying to the university by knowing that the supervisor is leaving, and therefore you might be asking that university to find alternative supervisors. If you want to have, we can take that discussion offline, and I can tell you what the different options are on a one-to-one conversation. So that's a first step to find the supervisor. But what is probably more important is the communication with the supervisor. Now, I've got a few bullet points there. Some of them are obvious things. That when you contact your potential supervisor, it is important, first of all, to address them properly in the email. One thing which I found really useful is to tell them something interesting about yourself, and in that way explain your research interests as well, and how they feel they fit with their expertise. Really, really important. Proofreading, attention to detail, not make any extravagant claims, especially if you say you have read the publications. Make sure you have read those publications. And that's, the first discussion you have over an email that prepares you for face-to-face interviews. And some of the questions they might ask you is around your motivation, is around how you feel their publications and their expertise fits with your PhD project. And this is where you need to make sure that you have read, the information you said. But again, going back to the initial few bullet points, tell them something interesting about yourself. And sometimes that has to do with your motivation, because as supervisors, we try to find out candidates that stand out from the rest in order to support them in that whole process. I've got a question from Muhammad. I'm studying refugee care MA at Essex, but there is not any related PhD related to this program or psychology in the accepted PhD programs for the students. No, Mohammed, you shouldn't be looking for the PhD programs that are validated, because those are irrelevant. It's only if you want to do straight to a PhD. I think in your case, you need to talk to potential supervisors and apply directly to the PhD program at Essex, where the supervisor is located. So it doesn't really matter whether Essex doesn't have any validated PhDs. These are only for those students that haven't got a master's and they want to go straight to a PhD from their undergraduate. So I think in your case, the people that you're working with in that master's are potential supervisors, and you need to approach them with your proposal. So that's important in communication with the supervisor, because you get the supervisor to show an interest in your work. Now, last part of the webinar is where I'm focusing on reverse engineering what we're looking for in a proposal. So let me tell you a bit about the process. So you apply to your home institution and you apply to SeNSS. And the first step is that you need to be proposed by your home institution. Now, most institutions, as part of your application, they will interview you. And in that interview, they will give you feedback on your proposal, and they will also make a decision. If you're a strong candidate, the institution will decide to put you forward, and they will decide to propose you. Every university in every pathway has 3 places. One of those 3 places has to be an undergraduate student coming to do a PhD straight from their undergraduate. That's a minimum requirement. A university might decide that all 3 places are from undergraduate students that come straight to the PhD. So technically, you've got quite good chance if you're undergraduate student, strong undergraduate student. On top of those 3 applications that the university can put forward in every pathway, the university can put 2 additional candidates forward, as long as they come from underrepresented groups. I'm afraid to say that at the moment, because of ESRC rules, underrepresented groups are only defined for home students. So we haven't managed to define them for international students, which means that those underrepresented candidates from underrepresented groups will only be home students. But if you're a home student coming from one of those protected backgrounds, mature students, gender diversity students, BAME students, the university might decide to put your application forward in addition to the 3 applications that they will put forward anyway. All these applications from the 10 institutions come together, and they're then reviewed by what we call people at the pathway level. So business and management, socio-legal, all these are pathways. Now, an interesting point there is that occasionally people might come from the same discipline, but they might come from different specializations of that discipline. So I take my own discipline, business and management. Business and management is quite diverse. It ranges from operation management, logistics, data analytics, to anything like organizational psychology, HRM, and marketing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person on that panel that will be reviewing your application will come from that particular expertise. Therefore, your applications should be able to talk to individuals who are not necessarily direct specialists. So you need to find the balance there that you can discuss with your supervisor, that your application is targeting a very specific topic, but at the same time, it's written in a way that a non-expert in the field can actually read it and evaluate it. What happens then at the pathway stage? Pathway leads read those applications. Your application might be reviewed by up to 3, 4, 5 individuals. They score your applications on the criteria that I will be talking in a minute. And then we create a list which goes across all pathways on the basis of the quality of each application. And what we do is we go down that list and we make awards up until to the point where we have exceeded or we have reached the available funding. And as I said, usually that point is at around 40 applications. Let me give you an overall sense. Last year, we received in total about 750 applications. There were, out of those 750, 250 were proposed for the pathway group stage. And out of those 250, 80 were proposed for the management board stage, and 40 of them got funding. So this is how we funnel applications. Yes, so scholarships for international students are limited, but they're limited. We limit them when we get to that final stage. So an institution can put as many international students forward as they wish. A pathway can put as many international students forward as they wish. There are certain areas and certain subjects where obviously international students tend to be the dominant group, but ESRC rules only allow us to give 30% of our total number of scholarships to international candidates. So that on an annual basis is the equivalent of anything between 12 and 15 scholarships, depending on how many we give as a total. So what happens is, as we go down that list, we don't differentiate, we don't have a separate list for international candidates. As we go down that list, we award on the basis of quality, and we ensure that when we come to international candidates, we don't exceed, for example, 12 or 15, 12, anything between 12 and 15. Now, if we get to a point where international candidates are higher than home candidates in terms of the scores, but unfortunately fall outside the quota, I'm afraid we don't award that scholarship. That candidate enters what we call a reserved list, and sometimes international candidates might withdraw their application or they might decline our offer, and that means that the next international candidate can actually receive funding. Over the years, there is a relatively small proportion of students that decline our offer or withdraw their application, sometimes for personal reasons, sometimes because they might got a scholarship from another TTP. And therefore, if you are anywhere between position 40 and 50 on that list, we would put you on a reserve, and you might still get an offer from us. Right. How do we write a strong proposal? So what do the pathway leads will be looking for in terms of proposals to give them strong scores? First of all, it's really, really important to have that fair and honest discussion about your research proposal with your supervisor and listen to their advice constantly and their feedback and integrate their feedback. You will also be given the opportunity to incorporate feedback from your interview in your application. So what happens is, after we close the deadline on the 20th of January, and we allow institutions to make decisions about which candidates they will be supporting, for those candidates that will be supported by the institutions, we reopen those applications and we allow you not to resubmit, but to make minor changes in those applications before they go to the pathway stage. And this is usually where you get the opportunity to incorporate feedback from your interview. You need to read carefully the SeNSS application guidance notes, which are on the website, and the HEI apply guidance, so you know what to expect. And you also need to bear in mind that the application has two stages. One, your application form, and there is also the supervisor statement. These are completed in sequence, so we expect you to finish with your application form before you can request the supervisor statement. And once you've submitted your application, your supervisor is auto-emailed to request their statement. So there is this element of the process that you need to be aware, but most importantly, the key focus should be on developing a strong research proposal. Now, what are the components? The title, the abstract, the proposal, and then the personal statement. The personal statement is where you need to provide us with all these additional details about your training, your motivation, and everything like that. Essential ingredients for a good research proposal. The issue. I usually call it the so what question. What is the problem? Why do we need to look into this problem? How will you address that problem? What is your research design? How will the research achieve its objective or objectives? And then who benefits from that? What will be the research? What will the research contribute? These are key ingredients. So you need to be able to tell us what the issue is, why you're doing this particular research, how you will be doing it in order to achieve your objectives, and also, who is going to benefit? Is it going to be the academic community? Is it going to be practitioners? Is it going to be, the public sector? Who's going to benefit from doing that research? So the proposal is key to the application. You need to discuss that frequently with your proposed supervisor. And what usually assessors look for is high quality and strong potential for doctoral study. Purpose, originality, why you want to do that. So you need to basically talk about the key areas, the research problems, sometimes the research context, what you will be contributing, and then of course the methods. Now, let me tell you how these things translate onto the evaluation criteria that we have. And of course, I think it goes without saying that we would expect, and reviewers would expect, very, very close attention to detail in your proposal. So make sure that free of typos, make sure that they're clear, there is this lack of clarity, make sure that you don't use extreme jargon, because I said occasionally these proposals might be evaluated by non-experts in that specific area of your discipline, and also, a relatively short proposal with a very long references section. 3 criteria that we use. First of all, evidence of the quality and feasibility of the proposal. So these are 2 separate things here. First of all, the quality, and I'll come back to what the quality means in a minute, but also you need to demonstrate that it's feasible. It's feasible within the 3 years of the funding period. Then, evidence that you're well prepared for your proposed research and future career. So you can draw on your past experiences. It doesn't necessarily only be academic qualifications. It could be, as the example, the answer I gave earlier, it could be professional experience. It could even be life experiences that they have prepared you for research and this future career. And then the last set of criteria is around the suitability of the proposed supervision and the training. And obviously that is getting a smaller weight than the other 2, because the other 2 are probably more about you. The third one is probably more around the environment around you and how that environment will support you. Assessors use a score from 0 to 6 to evaluate the proposals, just to give you a sense the funding threshold the last few years has been around 5.2 to 5.3. So proposals that attract funding are what we would call excellent proposals. They need to demonstrate excellence in all criteria, and occasionally they demonstrate outstanding, so highest level for all criteria. So you need to ensure that none of these sections, none of these criteria basically scores below 5 in order to get a good chance for your proposal. So what do they mean and what will assessors be looking for? So the evidence of the quality and feasibility of the proposal, assessors will be looking in your outline of the proposed research projects, the reasons for pursuing it, the wider significance it has. And also, we would expect that information to be supported by the supervisor. So we're looking for your ability to design and conduct a strong research project. We're looking for the ability to have a coherent and well thought out research plan, but also we're looking for an awareness of where you are within the discipline and the potential impact you might have. So that's the kind of first area that we are looking for. In simple terms, what does it mean? It means that reviewers look for ideas that stand out. Remember, occasionally these reviewers will probably have to read 30 applications. So if you've got an application, an idea that really stands out, that is going to be a memorable proposal. So very good, innovative ideas tend to score highly in terms of that first criterion. Then you need to support. You need to ensure that you have adequately covered the literature. And what I mean there is that, occasionally we look at proposals and you look at the reference list, and the last paper they're referring to is a paper in 2015 or 2016. So you need to ensure that you bring up-to-date references. And also, you shouldn't be under or over-promising. This is part of the feasibility question. If your project fits into a wider project, a bigger question in the literature, say what that bigger question is, but don't promise you're going to resolve that problem. Tell us which part of that problem you will be focusing on. And then ensure that you have appropriate methodology, that your methodology is aligned with your project aims. So if your project objectives talk about measurements and things like that, then the expectation is that you will go down the route of proposing some form of quantitative methodology. Equally, if you talk about relations, beliefs, then it's more and more of a qualitative type of methodology. And also something that we learned the hard way over the last few years because of COVID, think about a contingency plan. Think about the what if question. If things don't go as planned, how are you going to make sure that your project progresses? And the last few years, people are looking for contingency plans because we live in an uncertain world, and obviously COVID taught us a very hard lesson in terms of changing projects that they were absolutely feasible before COVID, but during the COVID period, they became unfeasible. Think about someone who basically had, as part of the projects, interviewing school kids or doing intervention into schools, with schools being on lockdown for a long period of time. They can't simply wait for the schools to reopen. They have to find alternative ways of progressing their projects. So the way we evaluate the proposal is outstanding quality, clearly articulated aims, appropriate methodology, well-defined, impact of the research needs to be there, and also feasible project within the time and the resource limitations. Now, it's only not necessary to have a good proposal and a fantastic idea. But what you also need to do is you need to convince the panel that you are the most appropriate person to undertake your proposal, this proposal. And this information will be based on your description of how your previous experience, academic, professional, life experience has prepared you for postgraduate study and research. And also your supervisor's evaluation of your suitability for such research. So they can bring in performance at undergraduate, postgraduate level. They can bring your relevant professional experience. They can also discuss, how the program will contribute to your long-term career aim. So they really need to understand, your supervisors, how, your motivation feeds into that long-term career aims. Because the supervisors and their statement is crucial here to convince us about your preparation for your proposed research. So it does not just matter if you have a strong proposal, but you also need to demonstrate you are the most appropriate person to take it forward, and that you have the right skills, the right motives, and you have the drive. Remember, the PhD is not a 100-meter race, it's a marathon. And there are going to be periods of time where you're going to be feeling very lonely, you're going to have difficult days, but equally you're going to have fantastic days. But what it's really important is that, you can stand up and run again, stand up and run again. And when you face that wall, as marathon runners describe it, you have the perseverance and the drive and the motives to move on, keep going, and break that psychological and mental barrier. Now, the last bit that reviewers look for is this evidence of the suitability of the proposed supervision and the training. And what we're looking at your supervisors, the supervisory team, the research areas, the knowledge, the expertise in relation to the proposed projects. We look sometimes at the individual roles that these supervisors play. So occasionally one supervisor is an expert in the disciplinary area, and another supervisor is an expert in a methodological perspective. And, we then look at the training needs you have and how you're suggesting that you meet those training needs. We don't expect you to be 100% ready for undertaking a PhD research before you start your PhD. What we expect you, though, is that you have developed that self-awareness that says, look, I might need training in that area, or I might need training in that area, and perhaps think about ways of meeting those training needs. So I've got a question around supervisors. So what all the institutions, all SeNSS institutions do is they work with what we call supervisory teams. You will never have one supervisor only. You usually have at least 2 supervisors. In some cases, you might have even 3 supervisors. Depending on the needs of the project, the university should be able to support you with the most appropriate team. So you definitely need more than 1 supervisor. And the interesting thing, for example, in the collaborative projects that I've mentioned already, the ones that we have on the website, you've got a supervisory team at the institution, an academic supervisory team, and then you've got an additional supervisor from the collaborative partner who helps you with the empirical or applied element of your PhD. No, the work plan with steps of the research is part of the proposal, so you need to integrate that. You could always have a separate document that you can upload as an appendix, which might be something like a Gantt chart. We use Gantt charts a lot to demonstrate, how the research will take place, but it's also equally useful to have, a work plan integrated into the proposal. For example, if you're a psychology applicant and you're thinking of doing 3 studies, you need to tell us, when you're going to be doing roughly the first study, the second study, the third study. If you're doing a survey, for example, and you might want to do a trial, you need to tell us, how much time the trial will take and how much time the main survey will take. So the work plan is actually quite interesting. because it also helps you justify the feasibility of the project. So in simple terms, you not only need an excellent proposal, a clear demonstration that you're the best person for the research, but you also need to demonstrate that you will be supported by a team that has expertise and experience and can identify the training needs. I can show you the structure of the proposal again at the end. Yes, of course, I can go back and show you that. Before I do that, I want to say a few more words about this additional information we asked you. So one of the things that we ask you as part of the application is your personal statement. So the proposal is one thing, but the personal statement is also important because this is where you tell us all the other bits of information that are around you. So here you talk about your reasons for applying and why you deserve this studentship. You can talk about your academic interests. You could talk about your motivations. Remember the motivations I've mentioned in the very beginning. Why that university, why that department, why SeNSS even. And then, of course, tell us what are the aspects of studying with SeNSS that you find most appealing. The placement. So for example, sometimes students say, oh, I've got this placement opportunity that I want to work towards, and SeNSS is ideally placed to offer me that placement. And you also need to demonstrate your preparedness for postgraduate life, passion for your topic, existing knowledge, experience. Now, I think I preempt the question pool in there. The proposal should follow this structure. So in brief, what you need to have is a description of your research proposal, and this is the idea, and what motivates you to explore that idea. That can come from a gap in the literature you've identified. It could come from some stylized facts you have identified. It could even come from your life experience, especially if you're an international student coming from an underdeveloped country. What you then need to do is you need to go and tell us what is the research background. So what is the underlying literature that supports this idea? Where would you position yourselves? You would position yourself in that particular area of the literature, and consequently refine the exact questions you want to answer. Once you've done that, once you've told us the idea, you told us the literature that supports that idea, and you told us the questions that you want to answer, you need to effectively tell us how. And this is the section around the research methods. So what is your methodology? Are you going to do mono methods, mixed methods, multi-methods? Perhaps you might even want to discuss a bit your research philosophy and the way you approach things as a researcher. What are you? Are you, positivists? Are you a critical realist? Are you an interpretivist? Obviously, if you are a master's student that goes to do a PhD, we expect a far better awareness of these areas than if you're coming straight from an undergraduate program. And this is why I said in the beginning that we separate the applications in these three groups, and therefore we don't compare across the groups, but we compare within the groups. The next section is your proposed timeline, or the work plan as we referred to it earlier. And then finally, remember when I originally started this discussion, I said, the beneficiaries, who benefits? And the who benefits is related to the proposed impact. Who is going to be the end user of this research? Who are you expect to influence with this research? It could be, an academic audience. Equally, it would be practitioners or policymakers. Who are you thinking of influencing, and how you're proposing to do that with your PhD? I've got a bit more information there, two websites written by myself and another colleague of mine a few years back, but they're still relevant in terms of information. One is how to apply for PhD funding, and then the other one is how to apply for a PhD in the UK, because that tells you a lot about, supervisors, application process, so on and so forth, especially for those of you that you come from an international background. As I said, I will share the slides of this presentation immediately after the end of the presentation with the emails you have used for your registration. So that's something I will be doing once we close, and the links are going to be active hyperlinks, and you can then visit them. That's all from my side in terms of the SeNSS, the PhDs. I hope it was informative for all of you. I'm more than happy to basically pick up any questions. The word limit of the proposal includes the bibliography. We usually treat that as an extra in terms of the reference list for the proposal. Yes, so there is a question for those of you, if there are any that you might have started your PhD or you're considering of starting a PhD. If you've started your PhD, or you might be starting your PhD in January, you're still eligible to apply for funding. One point of cautiousness there, in order to be eligible for funding, you need to have at least 50% of your registration period left. So if someone has completed their second year of the PhD, they're not eligible for funding. If someone has simply completed their first year of PhD, yes, they're eligible for funding. What you will be receiving is you will be receiving funding for the remaining period. So you won't be receiving for 3 years, but you will be receiving for 2 years. You will be put in the pot of candidates of the +3. So this is where you will be competing against. If I'm rejected this time, can I apply again next year? Yes, you can apply again next year. We are currently in the process of rebidding for funding from the ESRC. So in one shape or another, SeNSS or a DTP will exist, and therefore you will be eligible to apply for funding next year. We don't look at past applications and success or failures, so it's going to be treated as a completely fresh application. If we complete the master's proportion of the 1+3 and not the PhD, do we still get the master's qualification? Yes, there are cases where students, for personal reasons, had to unfortunately drop out after the master's year. You basically, yes, receive the master's qualification as if you were doing a standalone master's. And of course, we don't ask for any fees or any stipend to return back to us. So that's all paid. It's done, dusted. I think for all of us, it would be a pity to lose a student, but we appreciate that occasionally family circumstances or other circumstances prevent you from moving forward. Now, Sally, I think that's something that you need to discuss with your supervisor. Sometimes bibliography includes a wider set of sources. I think in the context of a PhD proposal, the expectation is that you would include a reference list predominantly and not a bibliography. So the references in that list would be citations in the document instead of having a much wider bibliography kind of list. Becky is asking, do you have to be living near the university? Can you be supervised remotely with periodic visits and face-to-face supervisions if you live far from it? The answer there is it depends on the supervisor and the supervisory team. That's a discussion you need to have with the university. And the only thing which you definitely cannot do is live abroad. So you can't live abroad and travel to the UK only for your supervision. You would need to have, you would need to establish a permanent address in the UK in order to become eligible for the funding. So once you start your PhD, you would need to come into the UK and live here. Now, obviously, if someone starts a PhD at the University of Reading and they live in Canterbury, that is feasible as long as that relationship with the supervisory team permits for that, and the supervisory team is absolutely happy with that arrangement. So as I said, the word limit of 1,500, it shouldn't be including referencing. Are there a specified number of scholarships for each area, study, or subject? No. It's a very straightforward answer. Each pathway presents the top candidates, and then the decision is only on the basis of the quality of the applications. So obviously there are pathways that are relatively more successful than others. But so for example, psychology tends to attract very strong candidates, but equally at the SeNSS level, we don't have any quota for pathways. We don't have any quota for universities, and therefore it's a competition that awards to the strongest candidates and the strongest proposals. No, the decisions are based on the quality of the proposal. Now, obviously, the attractiveness of the topic, it's integrated in that quality of the proposal, in the sense that, I told you that an attractive topic, an innovative area stands out for reviewers, but that's only an implicit process that the reviewers will go through. So from our perspective at SeNSS, we don't have priority areas that we invite proposals at the moment. So it's more about which areas the reviewers consider strong areas, and then they evaluate proposals accordingly. Right. If we have no more questions, I just want to thank you for your time. We've got one more session in the next couple of weeks, which is going to be on a Saturday morning. It's only a question and answer session, that one. I'm not going to be giving another presentation. What I will be doing is I will be picking up questions that have been asked over the last few seminars, and I will be giving you additional responses. So if you've registered, what I will do is I will share with you the slides of the presentation, and the recording will become available on the website in the next couple of days. So the recording will be on the website, but then the slides of the presentation I will be sharing with you on the basis of your registration email. And then, of course, as I said, talk to your supervisors. There is really not much time left in the clock. Talk to your supervisors, develop your proposals. If there are any difficult questions that you need to ask, and your supervisor or your institutional lead doesn't have the answer, you can always come to us, to the core team, and we will be able to provide you with that answer. I just want to close this by thanking you again for your time and wishing you all the best with your proposals, and say that I'm really looking forward to seeing some of you in our induction events as new PhD students next year. Thank you.